know everyone, but maybe not quite. Just in case there's anyone I don't know, I'm David Hope-Jones, Chief Executive of the Scotland-Malawi Partnership, and thanks for joining us in person today. It's still genuinely exciting to be able to meet in reality. I've discovered as a boss of a small team, there's nothing you can say when you meet your staff in person that doesn't sound really creepy. Like, wow, look, you've got a body, or like, oh, wow, you've got legs. So I'll resist any of the elephant traps there, other than to say it's wonderful to be together in person. In a moment, my colleague Faye's going to press the magic button, and others will join us. We've got a few staff members in Scotland and in Malawi joining us. So I'll first ask, Linda and Louisa, is the tech working okay for you? Can you hear me rabbiting on okay?
All good on the tech side.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Linda,
on good side as well. I hope you can hear me that side.
We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Louisa. Thankfully, ever shorter list of COVID things that I have to say at the beginning of meetings, and I don't think there is anything official I need to say other than it's up to you if you'd like to wear a mask. There is alcohol gel provided. Stuart's doing the air hostess thing. There's masks, and please do as you are comfortable. But following Scottish Government guidance, it is obviously at your personal discretion. Thank you. This is Mzuzu Coffee. So thank you very much to Eve for that. If you're using, please do tweet, but if you're using it, if you are, please do use 4G if you can. If you're really stuck, you can use our Wi-Fi, but obviously the more that we keep the Wi-Fi for the Malawi connection, the better it will be. And I think that's everything I need to say before letting people in. So Craig, if you could press the magic button, and I'll say a few more things that affect everyone as well. Great stuff. I'll get started now, and I'm sure others will be joining. I think we're up to about 77 booked in for remote participation and 20 in the room. Welcome to this our roundtable meeting with Fiona, who I'll introduce in a moment. But we're very grateful for her time and a chance to be able to meet with members of ours. Some hybrid kit explanations. This sinister thing here is called an owl. If you've not come across it before, it's because it can sort of rotate its head 360 degrees. So there's nowhere that you're safe such that you can be seen and heard from any angle with this one. But we do have a secondary system here to make sure that we can be seen. But just to say, the curating of it will jump around when we get to the discussion bit. As you talk, it'll jump around and people pop up, and that's all automated. The video is the meeting is being recorded, and it'll be publicly available afterwards. So this isn't the place to air any state secrets. The microphone is here. So the further you are from the microphone, the more I'm going to be looking to you to enunciate with your greatest sort of thespian voices down at the far end. But I will say, any of our digital participants, if at any point you can't hear, I can see the chat box in front of me. So just put in the chat box, can't hear, and I can then repeat any points that have been made from the further reaches of the table. Subtitles are available. Just click the link at the bottom of the screen if you're joining digitally. Please do tweet both at Scotland Malawi and at Malawi Scotland, because this is a co-hosted event, both the SMP in Scotland and MaSP in Malawi. And finally, just to note, thanks for your patience. If we have any technical problems or challenges, we're all on a learning journey with this. The aims of today's meetings are fivefold. Firstly, to share FCDO Malawi information updates and priorities with our membership, both in Scotland and Malawi. To give FCDO Malawi an insight into the depth and breadth of the civic links between Scotland and Malawi. To briefly discuss key topics and priorities identified by our members. To explore areas of potential future collaboration. And just to create an open and inclusive and transparent space for dialogue, and most importantly, to build that relationship that's there. There's a lot to fit into the next 60 minutes or so. We want to make it as useful as possible for as many as possible. And certainly some of the things that I've seen in the past is there'll be sort of loud voices in person around the table who sort of dominate the agenda, and particularly at the Malawian side, people not being heard or interacted. So part of my job will naturally be to keep people to time and make sure that we're welcoming and valuing the Malawian participation as much as we are the Scottish participation. What we'll do is I'll hand over in a moment to, well, firstly to Stella, my counterpart in Malawi, who will say a few words in a moment. We'll hear from Fiona, who will speak for about 10 minutes or so about her priorities. And then we will have a very quick round table, sort of 2 sentences maximum each for people to introduce themselves. So do start thinking about what punchy point you want to make. And then we've identified 5 topics that we'll prioritise, both from the submissions that we've had as you booked places. The topics that were requested the most number of times have been selected, and hopefully we'll have a quick 5 minutes for just open Q&A at the end. I think that's everything I had to rattle through very quickly. Stella, can I ask if you're there? This is a co-hosted meeting, and it'd be wonderful to hear from the CEO of the Malawi-Scotland Partnership. Stella, over to you if you'd like to say a few welcoming remarks.
Thank you so much, David. Sorry, I joined a little bit late because my network was acting up. Fiona, I don't know whether I should say you're welcome to this meeting, or I should say, David, you're stealing our Fiona. Because she's Malawian and now she's on your side. Let me take this opportunity to thank you, Fiona, and the rest of the people who are gathered in here for popping up to this particular meeting. We are thankful, and we as Malawi Scotland Partnership and its membership, we are open for collaboration of any kind. We are a network that is geared to ensure that we develop Malawi, we engage the citizen, and ensure that there is a lot of transparent in the manner we are conducting our projects. To the membership, let me say, let's take this opportunity to interact with Fiona, who is the director of FCDO, based here in Malawi. I'm aware that some of you have never interacted with her. Others have done before, because we also had a meeting of this type last year. So let us take this opportunity to ask as many questions as possible, so that we should set a foundation that can enable us to work more closely with FDCO. Those who are not aware, FDCO is the former DFID. They are here in Lilongwe, in City Center, based at the British High Commissioner's Office. So, Fiona, thank you so much. And to the membership, let's interact as much as we can, so that we should squeeze a lot of information from Fiona to set a basis for us to work more closely with them. Otherwise, over to you, David. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for letting us have Fiona. I promise we'll give her back. Yes. As has been said, Fiona is the Development Director of FCDO Malawi, what in old money was the DFID bit of what is now FCDO. Fiona, as I'm sure she'll say, is originally from Edinburgh. We've just had lunch comparing the best student drinking hall in Edinburgh, so fine Scottish pedigree. And we had a similar meeting, albeit entirely digital, about this time last year, April last year, which was really, really useful. And I do want to say, in all seriousness, a big thank you to Fiona. A very, very busy job in Malawi, but she makes great time and effort to be responsive to the network and really valuing it. So we really appreciate that. And Fiona speaking on her holiday here in Scotland. So I think we can all appreciate that. And what today's all about is that sort of constructive discussion, constructive dialogue, finding ways within the capacity that people have, which is limited, everyone's very busy, of connecting up what's happening at a civic level between Scotland and Malawi, and what the UK government is doing in Malawi. And Stuart, in standing up, reminds me of one thing I didn't say, is that there'll be photos taken as well. So both Stuart and Jade will kindly take some photos. So Fiona, I think we're pretty much on time. Over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, David, for the introduction, and Stella also. Actually, it's a really great pleasure to say, Stella, that it's very weird to see you on screen and not in person, which for me is a great demonstration of all the amazing strides we've made over the last year in terms of meeting up face to face and sort of moving past the early COVID stage. I very much remember moving to Malawi January last year and not being able to meet anyone for months. Still, I think it took us quite a long time to meet in person. And of course, the first one of these we did was completely virtual. So I didn't get to meet any of you face to face, and it's really nice to be here today. I've actually never had a work meeting in my hometown of Edinburgh before, despite having worked for DFID for 20 years. It's actually my 20-year anniversary this weekend. As a civil servant, who knew that was going to happen, but it did. And actually it's great to sort of put two halves of my life together, if you like. So my hometown and my day job based in Malawi. And Stella, I think you know, a piece of Malawi is always in my heart, even if I'm not there. So yeah, it's lovely to be here today. I'm not going to talk much about myself because I did that quite a lot, I think, in our first roundtable last year. But I thought maybe just a bit of an update on the sort of broader strategic direction of FCDO. I don't have a huge amount of news in terms of what we're going to be doing and doing differently in the British High Commission, but I can talk a bit about that. I can talk you through a couple of senior visits that we've recently had. And then really it's about the Q&A and making sure that we get enough time to interact. So without further ado, I will just crack on. I think it will be no surprise to anyone around this table that UK government ministers are particularly focused on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that has definitely taken up a lot of bandwidth at sort of senior political level, but also I think has been a bit of an opportunity for ministers to really take stock of the various different strategy documents that were in train before the invasion and really check that they were sort of fit for purpose, because I think it has really changed the way that we see ourselves as a country geopolitically. And for that reason, the much-trailed international development strategy is now due to be launched in a few weeks. It was going to be launched earlier this year, but I think ministers have taken a chance to pause and really reflect on what it is that they wanted to say. I have not seen a draft of it, but I think you can see from a lot of the Foreign Secretary's recent speeches what her strategic priorities will be. So I think you can really expect her to focus down on women and girls. That's a political priority, and it's also a priority for her in terms of where we spend our development programming resource, but also our sort of influencing and sort of strategic diplomatic efforts. I think she's also going to say something about humanitarian and crisis response. I think her view is that the world is becoming an increasingly complicated and insecure place. And also as part of a follow-up from COP26, that climate response, adaptation, environmental issues are things that she's going to really want to prioritise. So we can expect to see a focus on that too. I think global health security is also likely to be there. And that's no surprise in the wake of a global pandemic, which I think we all like to think of as being over, but actually the reality is that it isn't yet. And we can also expect future pandemics like COVID to be a part of our lives. And I think there's still a job to do in terms of future-proofing there and making sure that particularly developing countries are more ready to handle shocks like that in the future. And then I touched on it already a little, obviously climate and environment is a major focus. We think that the invasion of Ukraine is probably going to make it a little harder for the world to meet its collective ambitions on clean energy, but I don't see the UK changing its commitments, and I think we will still be trying to make sure that we meet our climate finance targets, but I think we need to be realistic about how hard that's going to be, and particularly the sort of downstream impacts on developing countries, which the conflict is making a lot worse. And then I think underneath all of that, or perhaps over it in terms of a strategic framework, there'll be a focus on partnerships, and there'll be a focus on economic development and trade, and also on strong institutions. So those are the things that I expect to see. It will be a very high level, it will be quite short. And then the next job after that is for leadership in the UK, but also those of us who are running high commissions and embassies overseas to really translate that down into strategies that work for us at country level. And then I'm also expecting at that same point to have some clarity on our future ODA budget. So I don't currently have that, so I can't tell you how much we're going to be spending in terms of ODA in Malawi over the next 3 years. But my best guess is that we will see a small growth in budget, but that will likely be towards the end of our 3-year settlement, and that the next year at least we will probably have a little less money, maybe not much less, but a flat budget is probably what we're preparing for. We also don't yet know what our, whether we will be asked to spend more capital rather than resource. So that means that we will have money for infrastructure, for building things, for research. And at the moment, we spend most of our money on sort of technical assistance, advice. It's a different way of spending ODA money, so we may have to change that over the coming years. And then we don't yet know what our sort of thematic spending targets will be. So we may be asked to spend a specific amount on, for example, women and girls, on humanitarian, and on climate. So those are things that we all need to work out. But to prepare ourselves, we have been sort of refreshing our own analysis of the drivers of poverty and potential drivers of growth in Malawi. We did something called a country development diagnostic in 2018, and we spent the last few months just refreshing that, checking whether our assumptions are still valid. And in some ways we're reassured that they are, because that means that we still think we're doing broadly the right things, but also it's a little discouraging in a sense, because a lot of those drivers are still there. And, you know, as everyone around this table and on screen knows, actually the challenges facing Malawi are large, and a lot of them are due to decades of bad governance and corruption, and those are not things that we can change overnight, and development takes a very long time, and we need to have strategic patience. So our sort of overall strategic framework is going to continue to focus on the 3 areas that we've been prioritising, and that's really breaking the cycle, so trying to help the government meet its own stated ambitions on reducing corruption in Malawi and making sure that it is accountable to its citizens for how public funds are spent. It's also trying to encourage the growth of the private sector. The Malawian government itself doesn't have enough money to do everything it needs to do, but in order to create jobs, in order to drive economic growth, you really need an environment where the private sector can thrive and develop. And that's homegrown, indigenous Malawian private sector, but also foreign investment, which is really much needed. We also want to secure some of the development gains that we have already made. Perhaps because Malawi has not faced conflict like many of its neighbours has, actually, although it is very poor, and although a lot of human development indicators are not great, they're not as bad as they might otherwise have been, and they're not as bad as you might expect to see for a country that is quite as poor as Malawi is. We don't want to lose any of that, and we don't want to, well, we want to try and help the government improve macroeconomic stability. I can't remember if I talked about this much at the last round table, but currently the IMF assesses Malawi as having unsustainable debt, which means that there are a number of different institutions that cannot invest there. So for example, UK Export Finance is not able to operate in countries that have unsustainable debt. The government doesn't have as much by way of forex reserves as it needs. It's sort of living hand to mouth and paying far too much recurrent expenditure on debt servicing. And the Minister of Finance and the whole of Cabinet is really bought into trying to turn this around, but it's not easy, and it really needs input of some of the, well, the IFIs, so the IMF and the World Bank. So we are working really closely with those institutions to try and make sure that Malawi is able to sort of dig itself out of this hole, and then it can start to improve service delivery and make sure that it's got the right systems in place to spend its own budget. And then the third area is really sort of preparing for the future, and that is that, you know, Malawi is not static. It has experienced and is going to experience exponential population growth. I think the latest figures I looked at was that the population might hit 60 million by 2063, and that is an enormous increase from, I think, around 5 million. Maybe Stella can correct me if I'm wrong, but around 5 million in the 50s. And it's a small country, and along with that kind of population growth comes environmental degradation. Deforestation is a big problem. People don't have, there's not going to be enough places for people to live. Unless that is tackled now, it's going to be a problem for the future. And you know, it doesn't matter how many schools the government tries to build, how many school places there are for people. It's just very hard to sort of run to catch up with that kind of population growth. So that's another area that the UK government is trying to focus on. So I think I'll sort of finish by saying that you know, Malawi really matters to the UK government. Last week we had a virtual visit from the Permanent Undersecretary Philip Barton, He had a bilateral meeting with Nancy Tembo, the Foreign Minister, and he met with one of our sort of program implementers, which is a program we run with USAID, which is about clean cooking for healthy forests. So it's about trying to create alternative livelihoods and to reduce charcoal. So he was able to see sort of the impact of some of that on the ground. And then he talked to staff because, you know, frankly, it's not been easy for any of us to be living overseas during the pandemic where we couldn't travel backwards and forwards to the UK. And also for our Malawian staff who are really struggling because of the rising cost of living. So that was really a great opportunity. And then a few weeks before that, the Africa Minister, Vicky Ford, visited in person. And she was only in Malawi for 24 hours as part of a regional visit, but we packed it in. She had a really long and great meeting with President Chakwera. They've met a few times, and they were talking about sort of shared challenges and priorities. And Minister Ford also was encouraging the President to really demonstrate progress on his priorities around anti-corruption, which he was all very much aware of. And then we took her to see a clinic and a school, and then she also got to see a factory that was building sustainable bricks and was doing 3D printing. You're smiling as if yeah, exactly. So she got to see some of the things that are really possible with UK investment, and sort of really cemented the importance of person-to-person relationship between British ministers and Malawian government. So that was really positive, and I think let's see what the future brings, but I'm really certain that Malawi will continue to be a top priority for the UK government. But I think I'll stop rabbiting off there. Should there be other things that you want to ask me, so please do go ahead.
Fantastic, thanks so much. Yeah, not rabbiting on at all. That's exactly what we're all here to do, to listen to your insights and expertise and the priorities of the UK government. In the agenda, we have 10 minutes now for people. I'm keen people, if they want to, have had some opportunity to be able to share a little bit about themselves. We've got 54 online and about 20 around this table. Stuart's passed a note saying Fiona has been introduced to everyone, I think, in this room, albeit briefly. So I think probably we can hopefully save a little bit of time here, because I think probably the discussion is the most useful time. I'm looking for nodding, and there seems to be nodding heads at this side. But I do want, again, you know, keeping to this point about digital inclusivity, I want our friends in Malawi particularly to have that same opportunity. So everyone joining digitally, what I'd like you to do is, if you'd like to, in literally 2 sentences, with as few semicolons as possible, to just introduce yourself if you want to, and anything, any very quick reaction, literally in 2 sentences. So please just put up your hand digitally, or wave at the camera. I'm trying to see if I can have a look at people. I can see Eve. Yep, it's an applaud. I'm not sure, Eve, whether you wanted to introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, hi, Eve Brodis, working with the Mzuzu Coffee Planters Union to bring in their packaged and roasted coffee. So important to bring in added value products. That should be quick enough, I hope.
Thanks ever so much, Eve, and we are literally drinking your coffee as we...
Good, lovely, well done. It's not my coffee, it's Mzuzu's coffee. I'm just trying to make sure more people can drink it.
Absolutely. Vincent, Vincent, over to you.
Hi,
Vincent.
everyone. Yes, I'm Vincent, working for St. John, Malawi. We're also doing Scottish Government Fund project in Malawi. So I thank everyone for participating in this meeting. I think for Fiona, this is the first time to interact with her as well. I look forward to good discussion on this meeting. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks, Vincent. I missed the organisation. Which organisation was it, Vincent?
St. John, Malawi.
John Malawi, thanks
John.
so much. I'm going to turn to Harold in a second, and then to Beatrice. But before I do, please do put in the chat box. You can give as long an introduction as you want in the chat box, and we'll share that with Fiona. But over to Harold.
All right, thank you so much, David. So I'm Harold Kuombola. I'm Country Director for Link Community Development Malawi. And thank you so much, Fiona, for sharing with us. Great to see and hear from you. At Link Community Development Malawi, we are supporting 6,000 adolescent girls through FCDO funding under the GEC, Leave No Girl Window Behind. Our aim is to provide accelerated learning to girls who never had a chance to acquire functional literacy numeracy whilst young, and they have got their transformation pathways, go back into primary school or any living. Through support from Comic Relief and the Scottish Government, we are piloting a Sports for Change program. So looking at how we can harness sports-induced learning outcomes and girls to provide necessary decision-making platforms. So yeah, we are excited to hear from you and we look forward. And let me extend our invitation to you that when you come back to Malawi and visit our program, we are in Lilongwe, Nchinji and Data. So we invite you to visit our program. Thank you.
So thanks ever so much, Harold. And we'll contact you about the Sports for Change. We're developing some work there. I want to go to Beatrice next. Beatrice, a couple of sentences. Currently muted, Beatrice.
Thank you so much, David, for this opportunity. This is Beatrice working with Nkoma Hospital in Malawi. We are having a project which we are rolling out cervical cancer screening into rural health facilities. We have 7 hubs, and also currently we have 27 health facilities providing these services in the rural of Malawi areas. So we are mainly focusing in the rural areas where we are meeting women, most of the women which they have never been screened before. As you know, Malawi is one of the higher burden of cervical cancer screening. So thank you so much, Fiona. I think once you visit Malawi, you may visit some of these very rural areas where you may appreciate what the Scottish government is doing to Malawian women. Thank you so much.
Beatrice, thank you very much. And the chickens of Nkoma are alive and well. I'm going to take 3 more and then we're going to move on. Heather Palmer and then Thomas. Heather, over to you.
Thank you very much, and nice to meet you all virtually. I'm Heather Palmer, CEO of African Vision Malawi. We've been operating in Malawi for 17 years. We focus in the Northwest Lilongwe district and Doa in the rural areas, focusing on education, health, agriculture and self-sufficiency. A new program which is coming up is focused on maternal health, so trying to provide more safe maternal health, and that is also connected to special educational needs units. So we're looking at early identification and early implementation. So I think that's enough. Thank you very much.
Thanks ever so, Heather. Thanks ever so much, Heather. So I'm going to turn to Thomas and then finally to Richard Banda. Thomas, over to you.
Thank you so much. My name is Thomas. I work with CCP Synod of Living Estonia Education Department, and we are implementing equal access to education in Malawi. It's a project funded by Scottish Government in partnership with Census Scotland. And we are in 3 districts of the northern Malawi, trying to help children with disabilities to have equal access to education. Yeah, I think I can end up there for brief.
Thomas, thank you very much. And there was one other speaker who I was going to turn to, who is, I'm not sure, he's just taken his hand down, and I embarrassingly can't remember the name. Richard, thank you. Richard Banda, if you're still there, just jump in.
Okay, so yes, I'm still here. Thank you very much. My name is Richard Banda. I'm working with the Community Support Against Climate Change. Our project mainly focuses on youth active participation in environment through environmental education, and also we do climate smart agriculture and also social and economic empowerment. Our organization has just currently joined the Malawi Scotland partnership, and I'm privileged that I've been interacted with the team and also our director. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Richard. Delighted to have you with us. And friends, I hope you appreciate that with just 60 minutes for the whole meeting, it wouldn't be a good use of our time to spend it all introducing ourselves. But I really hope that gives a flavour of the breadth, depth and impact of civic links that are represented in this meeting. And I think it's really nice that we've given that time to listen to the Malawian side, given that we have the opportunity of being in the room. So I think we're still tracking well to time and the outrageously condensed agenda. And I think what we're going to do now is look at 5 discussion areas, and they're the 5 that came up the most frequently in the bookings. And we're going to start with FCDO cuts in Malawi. And I recognise Fiona's already talked a little bit about what is known and crucially what is not known at this point. So I'll turn maybe first to Fiona and see if there's anything else you want to add at this point, and then we'll have a discussion, which I'll really be strict about keeping each of these discussion areas to 5 minutes. So Fiona, over to you first.
Sure. So I covered this a little in my introduction, but yes, we have had to reduce our budget significantly in Malawi, but not only in Malawi, actually in many African countries, as a result of the global pandemic, the fall in GNI, and then the reduction from 0.7 to 0.5, which I don't need to explain to any of you, you know what that means. And we're still waiting for our future allocations from the most recent spending review. My best guess is still that it will be a relatively flat budget for the coming year, and then hopefully with a small increase in outer years. But actually, so much depends on UK government finances, and because ODA GNI is a percentage, it fluctuates, and the British economy is varying wildly. And I think we don't yet know what the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine will mean for any country really. So I think there's still a lot that we don't know, but for planning purposes, my assumption is that we will not have a vastly different budget in Malawi over the next 2 to 3 years. There's still a chance, I think, that in the outer year of the spending review there will be more of an increase, but that's really where we are. And I don't know what people were hoping was that there'd be more news at this point, but once there is, it will be public.
Yeah, 3 ways you can ask question. If you're in the room, just give me a wave. If you're joining digitally, you can raise your hand digitally, or you can put your question in the chat box. Just while waiting for the first question on this subject of FCDO cuts, just to clarify sort of numbers, and you'll correct me wrong. So I mean, historically, it was at its high around sort of 80 or 90 million pounds the budget to Malawi. And then it was sort of 52 million, and then halved to sort of 25 million. But when you say sort of staying the same, maybe down shortly, then up, it's to the 25 million figure rather than the sort of 80 or 90 as was. So still over the last few years, a significant and very well reported. But throwing it open to questions. First off, in the room, just give me a wave, please.
Yeah, I was making notes whilst you were speaking and thinking, fantastic, really agreed with all the points you were making about what your priorities should be. But I just wonder, because about small grants. So in Scotland, the small grants funding stopped quite abruptly for the right reasons, I think, but still it's very hard when you've just got to the end of a feasibility study, you're getting international attention. What we're doing has been brilliant, but you can't then continue. How could small pots of money or smaller bits of money be applied for?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question. I think, speaking for FCDO, I don't see a world in which we will go back to teams managing lots and lots of small grants. We're never going to really have the capacity to do that justice. Where it works for us usually is to have a kind of umbrella organization that so we have one partner to work with, but then there might be smaller organizations that are, that actually spend money within that framework. I know that's not easy for very small organizations, but I think potentially government funding is not necessarily the easiest source of resource for that. I don't actually have at my fingertips what FCDO's own, so we had a similar mechanism for sort of smaller amounts of money for individual NGOs. That's not something that we've ever run from Malawi, but I can certainly take that back and find out what's happened to that mechanism within FCDO, because I just don't know.
Lovely, thank you.
I wonder, given how we've talked about this next year's budget being pretty well static, a bit lower, does that mean that it actually matches with a little more of the same to be able to meet that, rather than perhaps addressing some of the interesting things that I think we would all agree with the German Foreign Secretary's list. But will this year actually be static, not just financially, but actually in activity?
Right. So yeah, so basically when I moved to Malawi, we had a completely mature program pipeline. So there was not any money that we had that wasn't already programmed. So that's a good place to be in a world of a rising budget. It's not a great place to be in a shrinking budget because it means the only thing you can do is make cuts. So that's what we did. I cut one whole program, sadly. It was a program tackling violence against women and girls. I would very much have liked not to do that. But in a world where you have to make difficult decisions, that was one that we and the organisation that was implementing it for us decided together. It was a commercial contract, for them it was no longer viable. So that's why we made those really tough decisions. But for the most part, because our analysis showed a certain number of particularly strategic interventions that we ought to focus in as the UK government, I tried to keep them going as much as possible. I don't really know what will happen. I think once we have a sense of what our 3-year budget is, then we can really sit, me and my leadership team can really sit down and say, are all of these programs in their current incarnation really viable over the next 3 years? Does the theory of change stack up? Or do I need to redesign any of them? That's a roundabout way of saying, in answer to your question, in the short term, I don't quite know. In the longer term, we may need to reshuffle our portfolio, but there isn't space in the current budget for me to start doing lots of new things because we have a lot of existing programs that we're still trying to go on because they still have really great objectives. So yeah, TBC really on that.
Michelle, one quick question and one comment before we move on. From Head of Palmer, when does the 3-year budget start?
Last month.
Last month. And Benjamin Kerry, again, coming in on the point about small grants. I mean, just a little bit of context here. So we, Scotland Malawi Partnership, recognising the priority within membership, essentially made that pitch to the Scottish Government to create the small grants programme. It was created around for a number of years, and you've probably seen, you know, we very much advocate that it continues to be the decision was made not to continue that. And we continue to represent in the Parliament, and likewise, why we think that's a good idea for the reasons that have been articulated. But we've always had that dialogue with the UK government as well, and we were told for quite a while that the DFID wouldn't go down that route because just the due diligence costs a minimum of 5,000, so it's just not cost effective. There was then a programme that seemed to broadly emulate the Scottish Government's programme, a small grants challenge fund that ran for a number of years, and my understanding is that's not running at the moment. I'm going to move us on, unless anyone gesticulate wildly. I'm not seeing any wild gesticulation or any other comments in the chat box or hands up. The second subject area that was raised the most was trade, business and investment. My thanks to MaSP, our sister network, the Association of Malawians in Scotland, Amodzi, and Fair Trade Scotland. We heard from Eve a moment ago, who suggested this is a topic. Eve, as she has talked about value-add products. Keeping roasting income with farmers is key to support social justice. How do we encourage organisations in the UK to buy Malawian? So on trade, business and investment, Fiona, I don't know if you wanted to.
Sure. I can tell you a little bit about what we're doing, but I'd rather this was a discussion because it sounds as if there's things people want to tell me or want to ask, so let's do it that way. But as I think you'll have picked up from my introduction, that one of our top priorities as FCDO is to try and help drive economic growth in Malawi. When you look at why Malawi, which is such a poor country, why is it still poor despite stability? It's about corruption, but it's also about lack of private sector growth. And I think what we're trying to do is work with a government who have not been in power for a long time, help them to understand what is economically viable in Malawi and help them sort of move the economy from one that is based on subsistence agriculture that's not sustainable for the future into one where people look to a future where they have a job rather than a small plot of land that they use to exist from. And that's not an easy thing to do because you need the right legislation, you need the right attitude and approach, you need the right people in positions of power, so that, for example, there are fewer opportunities for corruption along the chain of sort of setting up a business. You just need to make sure that the incentives are right, that the tax structure is right, and then really you need to encourage people to come to Malawi, so you need some demonstrators. So a lot of what we do as a High Commission is advocate on behalf of British businesses who are trying to operate in Malawi. We have obviously historically a lot of tea estates. They're one of the biggest employers. Ilovo Sugar is a British company. I think it may be the biggest employer in Malawi. And then there are lots of smaller businesses who are wanting to invest in solar and other sort of economically viable activities. We want to make that as easy for them as possible. We want the Malawian government to see the UK as a partner of choice, and vice versa. Like people are saying, how do we help Malawian products sell in other markets? In terms of, so that's our influencing, but in terms of practical programming, we've got Malawi Trade and Investment Programme. Half of it is up and running already, and that's with a company called Trademark East Africa. And they are trying to, Malawi's landlocked, obviously, and needs to rely on trade with its partners. There's a lot that can be done there to improve and reduce barriers to trade, to make border crossings much easier, to make it easier for goods to move between Malawi and its neighbours. So there's a lot of red tape, systems, processes, and then looking at how ports function, things like that. And then the other part of it, which is not yet live, but we're hoping to tender, well, we have tendered, we're hoping to agree the contract, is actually an investment programme. It's quite small scale, but it's really looking at a high value commodity. So for example, macadamias or mangoes or something that is higher value than maize, and trying to work through all the different barriers from start to export to see where we can encourage the government to make some changes. So that's what we're focusing on, but I know there are a lot of people in the room that are also interested in this, so please ask me some questions, and I may not have the answers, but let's see.
Well, I'm just picking the question specifically on related to business and trade. And so Benjamin Carey asking, does the High Commission have provision for discretionary small grants for seed funding projects?
Do we have discretionary fund for
small grants for seed funding projects?
Well, not especially seed funding. I know you're not talking about agricultural seeds. We have a very, very tiny pot of money that is a legacy Foreign Office fund, but it's about 4,000 or 5,000. So that will pay for a couple of conferences really. So it's not really that kind of project. And we don't, because most of our ODA programming is legacy DFID, and we have got a very large scale programs that we're in the business of reducing. And we don't tend to have that kind of funding available to us. I don't see that being a direction that we will go in the future.
Thank you. Questions? Yes.
I'm interested in your program, in the program you mentioned on your investment program, because recently we were in Malawi and we were looking at water and supply chains, so sustainable and responsible water and supply chains. So that's in tea, in macadamia, in mangoes, in sugar, with and what we're looking at is the water footprint in the UK at the same time. So then I'm interested in your investment program, because water would be an essential part, I would say, of that they would need. That's under the Glasgow Declaration from COP26, which brings together government, business, and civil society. And FCDO is a signatory to that. So I think that's a really interesting place to
Thank you, that's a good point. And I think once we know, so the first step of this program is to figure out which product we would look at first. It may not be macadamias, it may be, but it's likely to be agricultural. So I think your point will be valid regardless. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I'm going to take two questions digitally and we take them back to back. If you can make it as concise as possible. First, Stella and then Aaron in Tier Funds. Stella, over to you.
Thank you so much, Fiona and David. I just want to ask, what is it that FCDO is doing in terms of building the capacity of Malawians or young men and women in the area of mining? Because we see a lot that Malawi has a lot of minerals, but we don't have capacity. So as a result, we have observed that there's a lot of mismanagement in terms of some of the minerals that are being mined. Thank you.
And I think we'll take Aaron, and then if you're happy to answer both. Aaron, Tier Fund.
Thank you, David. Hi, Fiona and everyone. I wanted to check on the issue of encouraging growth in the private sector. You have given an example for adding value to the macadamia. I wanted to check what mode or what strategy will that take? Is it giving grants to those private sector? I'm checking whether that would be sustainable. In our experience, even when working with the rural community, we have noted that if you're talking about business, giving them money, it has been disempowering. So I wanted to check what strategy will that take? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Stella, it's a short answer, I'm afraid, that we're not active at all in the mining sector, and I don't imagine that we will be. But I do share your concern. I know that as part of the Malawi 2063 agenda, the government is actually really keen to investigate mining as a source of revenue for basically the government needs money, and I completely understand why it's looking around at all possible opportunities. Mining is certainly possible, and I know that Malawi has a lot of rare earths that are important in electric batteries. So it's not a bad thing to do, but I think it is fraught with danger, as you say, and in plenty of other countries, it has not, extractive industries has not turned out to be a good thing for those countries, especially when the environment is not one that has got necessarily the right legislation in place. So I think it's a risk, to be honest. And I don't know how, well, I'm not quite sure which development partner would be interested in investing in this sector. It might be something more that like the World Bank or the African Development Bank would be engaging in, but it's not a conversation that we have a lot with heads of cooperation in terms of how might we support Malawi invest in mining. I'm not sure that's one that you'll find the international community rushing in to support, although we might, is the kind of thing where we might be influencing quietly behind closed doors to make sure that this doesn't become a curse rather than something that would be useful. I don't think it's a quick route out of poverty for Malawi, and then we certainly would be saying that to government. So on the question of our investment programme, it's not a grant giving programme at all. So we're certainly not going to be going into rural communities and giving them money for like to individual farms. It's more where we're trying to operate is more upper level, working with government, trying to work at the legislative level, trying to provide a demonstrator of what works, what doesn't work, trying to expose some of the barriers and challenges agricultural farmers will have in terms of adding value to their products. So it's the first step, I think, will be to do some scoping. So this project is not live yet, but to figure out which sector might we look at first, what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and then to sort of provide a demonstration of what might work, what the future might look like. So we're very far away from sort of giving out grants as part of this programme. But you're absolutely right, you need to be very careful if you do that kind of thing because of unintended consequences. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just very quickly, if you know, 1 second.
Sorry, just you said £4,000 to £5,000 doesn't fund much more than a few conferences. I can assure you when you're dealing with grassroots, small grants, it funds more than that. Our entire project last year was £10,000 and we delivered an intervention. So I think it's just important to recognise the value of grassroots people working together at a small level.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm going to move us on. There are other questions relating to trade and agriculture. I'm going to do the cheeky thing where I'll say, is it all right if I email you these questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you don't need to cancel all of your holiday, but at some point convenient for you if you're able to give short written answers to some of these questions. So please don't lose spirit if you've asked a question in the chat box that we haven't been able to call on, but I am going to move us forward. The next area that was requested was water. This was requested by Water Witness, Water Aid Malawi and James Hutton Institute. But I must say, Fiona very helpfully gave a heads up in the planning of this meeting, saying actually water really is an area that FCDO Malawi is very active in at the moment. So I was keen to share that and manage expectations. But with that introduction, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add on water.
No, not at all. I know that water is an area where FCDO as a whole is interested, and as my colleagues here were saying, it was a big part of the Glasgow Declaration. But again, I'm just putting my cards on the table. We don't have any bilateral programming in water in FCDO Malawi, and it's not an area that I'm briefed up on. But I'm very happy to be briefed up on it if there are things you'd like to tell me. So I'm all ears.
So on water, sanitation, and hygiene, anyone in the room first off wants to ask a question on.
We asked, well, I guess it was just to bring the topic to the table and see what you already knew, Fiona, and what other people knew about it. So FCDO with CDP and Water Witness at COP26 last year promoted this declaration of felt footprints, which looks at the use of water and brings together different nations, the private sector and civil society organizations, aiming to make the use of water fair and sustainable everywhere. So in Malawi, that's particularly interesting in the link with the UK because of the trade relationships, for example, with tea. And so the idea is to look at how water is used in different countries and see what are the barriers essentially for it to be used and the opportunities for it to be used more fairly and sustainably. And so we did have it, we went on a trip to Malawi in March for 2 weeks and just to build on work that we have already done in the country, supported with water stewardship and cooperatives, but also the private sector and some schools and hospitals on using water more sustainably, and then really learning about what are some of the key issues in terms of pollution, the way water is managed for water withdrawals, protection of ecosystems, climate change, resilience, and WASH in the workplace and in the communities. So I think it links with, I mean, definitely with climate resilience, which seems to be one of the big focuses going forward, but it also links with a lot of other interesting topics, like, for example, investment is a big part of the declaration. So can we make investments more and more in the future that bring money towards sustainability and sustainable, businesses where water is used sustainably rather than growing an economy that then you're going to have to go back and, 10 to 15 years and fix what hasn't happened. Yeah, do you want to? The only thing I want to add is why Malawi? Why did we go to Malawi? Malawi were the first in there. They were this is a no-brainer. They were the first to sign a government letter on the declaration in COP. They said this was just a no-brainer. So, but I think because water is so cross-cutting, I'm really interested to hear what other people are doing and what they, because we're also trying to incorporate what all the other programs, not a separate little box and a separate program, but taking account of our banker, what different NGOs are doing, because they can be co-signatories, but also it brings that effort together rather than everybody trying to do their own bit to their little corner.
And there's something that SMP can do here. It's been a little while since we've had a water forum, so we're happy to make that commitment, and in the next 6 months we'll have a water forum to do exactly that, to bring people around the table, listen to Malawi. We'll get the relevant minister in Malawi feeding in to that, so no, happy to commit to that.
Can I just say, I'm really interested in the idea of making sure that we do mainstream it, so it's less that we are ever going to have resource to invest in bespoke water projects, but thinking about how important it is across our other programs is probably the way forward. Yeah,
because water gets put in the water sector thing, and when you really look at it, it's like economic development, is climate change resilience, is health. So
and we're doing watershed management as part of our climate program, so it does fit.
Friends, I'm going to move us on to the next theme, which is education, proposed by MaSP, by Oxfam, and by Chifundu. Almost exactly 6 months ago, we had the President of Malawi sitting there with 3 of his cabinet ministers, including the Minister of Education, who has lived and worked in Edinburgh. In fact, worked in this building. So very strong education. Fiona, I don't know if you want to start with any sort of opening.
Sure. I mean, yes, the Education Minister is one of our sort of main interlocutors, and she and I obviously bonded very much over our Edinburgh connections, which has made life a lot easier. And yeah, she's a great activist minister. She's forward-looking, and she's someone that we can really work with. So that's one side of it, but actually also education is a sector that we have always been active in Malawi, and I think we probably always will be. In terms of ministerial priorities, women and girls is number one, and I think girls' education it's a no-brainer really. We currently have quite a big girls' education program, and it's sort of focused in a couple of different areas. One is trying to encourage girls to stay in school. So we, as a sort of strategy across the whole of FCDO, we tend to focus on primary education because that's the most sort of pro-poor way that we can deliver education services. But there's been a lot of COVID-related learning loss, and that impacts on girls more than boys. I mean, it's across the board, but in particular girls, we're really noticing the rate of teen pregnancies going up over COVID, and it's sort of contributing to downstream problems on population growth. We're really sort of trying to do a bit of COVID catch up. And then we've got a sort of mentoring program where older girls try and coach and encourage young girls to stay in school, and then also to move on to secondary school. And then the other is focusing very much on STEM. We are working with the Ministry of Education to redo the maths curriculum. We are at the stage now where we have just about finished the actual work, and we're about ready to pilot it and then roll it out. And then the other thing, which is actually across the board, when you have a bit less money to spend, you focus a bit more on other sources of funding, other sources of UK funding. So for example, as a major shareholder of the World Bank, we are investing a lot of time and energy in making sure that the World Bank is delivering education the way that it says it will. And then also trying to think through how if we've got less money to do direct service delivery ourselves, how do we focus upstream and get the governance right in the education sector? So we are also working separately with the World Bank on trying to encourage results-based education programming at district level, and how to make sure that the links between what's happening at district level and the education ministry are working better. So that's really where we're focused. I still don't quite know what the future will be, but I'm confident that the education sector is one where we'll continue to be active. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Fiona. Any questions in the room first off related to education? Please put your hand up digitally or put your question in the chat box. Otherwise, we will move on to our final section, which is climate change. Yeah, if it's on education, yeah.
It was just, I think, certainly one of the things we're seeing that really interrupts girls' education is the initiation camps. And I wonder if that's something we're looking at.
I'm sorry, what kind of camps?
Initiation camps that girls are taken out of school when they reach puberty and sent off to camps to educate them how to look after a man. Right. I'll send you a wee film. Sure, that we're about to release, but I think culturally that's a very important thing that's happening culturally in Malawi that is really affecting girls staying in school.
Yeah, and I think also, if you don't see many job opportunities in your future, then having a child is a livelihood strategy. It might not be a good long-term one, but you can see why girls either have no choice or they make choices that seem inexplicable.
So it's having no choice.
Yeah, well, exactly. So yeah, sure, please do.
And one more question on education before we move on to our final theme, which is climate change. Harold, if your question relates to education, over to you.
Yes, it's about education. And thank you so much, Fiona, for the clarifications. Exciting to see that the focus is, I think, at primary and all levels as well. But I just want to understand that Malawi, in the Education Act, has got compulsory education, and recently there have been discussions around rolling it out. Obviously, a lot of learners are out of school without functional literacy and numeracy. I don't know if that's an area that FCDO would be wanting to look at, bringing back all those learners into school so that as compulsory education kicks in, there can be accelerated programs that everyone else can be integrated into primary schools.
I'm not sure I understood all of that properly. It's partly the connection, but I think you're saying about people who are out of school and what can we do to get them back into school?
Yes, school-aged learners who are out of school and how getting them back into school, yes.
Yeah, so we don't have, our program's not specifically targeted at people who are out of school and trying to encourage them into school. It's more about actually supporting schools themselves and teachers and the systems and structures. Our programming on girls in particular is about encouraging them to stay in school or not to leave school in the first place, and also trying to do sort of after school catch-ups So I do, yes, it is a big problem. It's not something that we are focused on as a bilateral donor, but we do recognise that the government needs to try and encourage people to go to school. That's such a complex problem, and it's got to be around community outreach, making sure that that families value educating their children rather than using them to help like farm the fields. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to tackle, but you're right, it is a big problem.
Thanks very much. I'm going to shift us over to climate change, which is our last named topic, and we will just take a few just random open questions. So if you've still got a random open question, not on a topic covered so far, put it in the chat box and we'll just try and get through a few of those quickly. But climate change first off, I want to start with a question that was put in before the meeting by Oxfam about post-COP26 actions and opportunities. Also, Richard Bander's put in the chat box, what opportunities are there on clean energy at a grassroots level? And I want to thank Mary Ryan, who's shared the link to the IDRC FCDO CLARE, that's an acronym, I can't remember what it stands for, climate resistance call for applications, the deadline for which is just under a month now. And we bring together all the universities in Scotland to see if people want to collaborate. So after this, if that's of interest, drop me a line and I'll take you a part of that. But on those two questions on post-COP26 action and opportunities and clean energy grassroots levels, Fiona.
Sure. So in terms of, what are we focusing on as FCDO Malawi in COP26 follow-up? It's really helping. So I think none of you are at all surprised to know that Malawi is a really great leader internationally, both in terms of representing least developed countries, in terms of its chair of the SADC region, and in terms of understanding how to position itself at COP26 and make sure that it is being vocal and also has access to adaptation and climate finance. So we have been throughout the whole COP year trying to really amplify and encourage Malawi to stand up and speak out, and I think we've been pretty successful in that. But Malawi is a poor country, government lacks capacity. The challenge for both us as a bilateral donor and also the host of COP this year is how to make sure that the Malawian government stands firm to the things that it said it would do, because that's on behalf of its citizens, but also how do we help the Malawian government navigate the sort of complex world of climate finance. It's, as you all know now, we don't have so much money locally in Malawi to help the Malawian government, but there is a lot of global climate finance. It's very fragmented as a sector. I don't understand it myself, it's not my area of expertise, but if I don't understand it, then I can't imagine how a really busy official in Malawian government is able to navigate that. So one of the things we're doing is trying to make the links and make sure that they have access to these funds as much as possible. The other thing that's really important is accountability and advocacy. There's no sort of system of any of us going around policing countries to make sure that they've lived up to all of their commitments. But I think what we would like Malawian civil society and also civil society outside the country that's focused on Malawi, what we'd like them to do is hold both the Malawian government and the rest of us to account for the things that we said we would do. So shout out when it doesn't seem to be happening, raise risks, highlight opportunities, that's all really, really critical. I don't know yet how much money I'm going to have to invest in environmental degradation, in climate adaptation and crisis response, but it's an area where, as part of the three themes that I described at the start, it's part of future proofing, and there's a whole range of things that we can do. One of them is sort of our own sort of lobbying and advocacy on corruption, because that is, the charcoal sector is one that is rife with opportunities for corruption. We are supporting through our programming some investigative journalism, so that hopefully there's a light shown on some of this, and perpetrators who are both maybe some bits of government but also private sector who are really contributing to illegal charcoal, that they can be brought to account. There's something around re-educating and providing an alternative for people who are chopping down trees because they have to for their livelihoods. Those are not really the people that we're trying to target. We want to help them. And then there's also something around a social safety net for people who are affected by protracted crisis. One of the things that struck me when I first moved to Malawi was how every year there's a humanitarian crisis because of weather, and actually this is completely predictable, and trying to manage that as a crisis response is never going to get anything to change. So actually what we'd like to do is try and improve people's resilience to those kind of shocks in the first place, which is some of the watershed management and sort of smallholder agricultural techniques that we are continuing to do. That's what our programming looks like right now. And then also related to that is some of the stuff I talked about earlier, where I was working with British businesses and others who are interested in investing in alternative energy in Malawi. I don't quite know what it will look like in the future. We might do things a little differently, but it will continue to be a top priority for us in terms of the thematic sector. So, and small scale opportunities for, yeah, it's not something that I expect to have a lot of money for. We are focusing our attention on the government and helping government, but it's probably the case that there are other sources of funding, but there are not going to be pots of money held by FCDO Malawi.
Thank you. Any burning questions on climate change, either in the room, no one gesticulating? Do you put up a hand or put it in the chat box? Otherwise, yeah.
I'm just wondering if FCDO has done much thinking about climate change in terms of how it connects to other sectors. So I'm thinking about education, obviously, and the GEC is an amazing opportunity where there's been a lot of really good thinking about what works for girls' education, and some of us now have a lot of experience on that. But there's also sometimes a discussion about how climate change and girls' education fit together, but that can sometimes be in danger of forgetting the rights-based element of the girls' education. So I'm just wondering how much sort of thought and discussion is happening in FCDO on that.
Yeah, so interestingly, we made sure that the education minister was invited to COP, so that there could, she was on a panel actually about this very topic, and it's something that she really cares about a lot herself. The devil's in the detail of what that actually looks like. Is it that you provide climate smart infrastructure for education, so you build schools in a way that makes them flood proof, etc., or do you change the curriculum so that it teaches people about climate change and environmental degradation? There's any number of ways that you could tackle it as an issue. It's something I think we're at sort of quite early stages of discussions with the education ministry, but mentioning the GEC makes me think actually what we might want to do is talk more to other partners in this sector and see if there's a sort of sectoral approach that we could think about. It's probably more about how do we think about our current programs, how do we adapt them rather than setting up something bespoke, but I think it's a really interesting point. And it's not just education, but health as well. Yeah.
Heather, your hand's up. Was it climate change related? Heather Palmer.
Yes, it is. It's partly on the agriculture, and I know this, the FCDO is obviously connected with the government quite a lot in these programs, and sustainability and climate change is one of the key areas. I did put it up in the chat a little bit, but we're trying to promote sustainable agriculture and encouraging seed multiplication with local seeds and the use of local maize seed, but and also moving away from fertilizers, which just take everything out of the soil. It's going to be a slow process, but we are sort of making moves forward. But I just wanted to know, because I hear that the government are very against using local seeds and encouraging hybrid seeds and genetically modified seeds, and also encouraging the fertilizers. I understand for trying to get a bigger yield, but I think ultimately if we're looking to the future, we need to look differently at the farming methods. Is there anything that you know of is changing in those areas?
Thanks, that's really interesting. So I'm myself not knowledgeable about the details of agriculture and agricultural seed, and we don't have a sort of direct agriculture project. But, ooh, sorry, there's a bit of an echo. I'm just going to plow on.
Yeah, go.
Pun intended. Sorry. But agriculture being the majority of Malawi's economy, it's something that we think about across loads of our programs. So we have one of our governance programs tries to solve problems. It sort of takes an issues-based approach. And one of the things it looked at successfully was seed certification. And we encouraged the government to pilot some scratch card technology, because one of the things that was a big problem was that there's a lot of fake seed on the market, and it was obviously not producing yields that it should. And so now the government was rolling out, as part of its agricultural inputs program, basically you get it as a farmer, you get a bag of seed and it's got a scratch card on it. You scratch that off and you phone a number, and then the barcode matches or it doesn't. If it doesn't match, you've been sold fake seed. If it does match, you've got real seed. So to some extent we are, you know, that's the kind of, we're thinking about the governance of things rather than actual direct inputs. I hadn't heard that the government was opposed to sort of seed diversification hybrids. That's something that I will take back to my governance team and ask them if they know more about it. Fertilizer though is something that I think about a lot, and it comes largely from a sort of economic perspective, because of the agricultural input program, which is a fertilizer subsidy program, is a huge chunk of government's budget and is not really affordable. It was anyway not affordable with the global rise in fertilizer prices, and the invasion of Ukraine is making this to be a much bigger problem, not just in Malawi, but more broadly. I do wonder what's going to happen to that program, and it's when I get back to Malawi, I'm going to be talking to government and my colleagues about what we think the future will be. I don't think that a fertilizer subsidy program is going to be the way forward. So maybe there's a chance for reform there. Malawi buys most of its fertilizer, so I don't know maybe if that will accelerate some of the things that you're hoping to do in terms of using different farming methods, or whether it will be a problem, but I think it will certainly be relevant.
Very much. We're moving to the very final section, which is open Q&A. I'm going to put one question that hasn't come up so far, absolutely quick fire. So if you've got any burning questions, communicate in a sentence. I'm going to turn to you in a second, but I want to start with a question asked about 20 minutes ago in the chat box from Mavuto Bamusi. He said, I'm interested in the accountability and anti-corruption measures FCDO has put in place to ensure value for money. This is in view of recent reports of corruption in Malawi society. We've touched on governance, a few points for those who to read that one.
Yeah, so I think, you know, as you all know, the Tonsi Alliance was elected on a ticket of tackling corruption. And certainly, whenever he gets a chance, President Chakwera talks about this and talks about how important it is to improve accountability to Malawian citizens for how their public funds are spent. It's a big job, it's not an easy job, and it will take a long time. And I think none of us should be surprised that 2 years later, it feels as if the government has probably not done quite enough. But you know, they've had a global pandemic to tackle at the same time. It's really challenging stuff. It's one of our sort of key priorities as FCDO, and we do have a program that we operate jointly with the United States, and it's sort of supporting law enforcement agencies. So we support the Anti-Corruption Bureau, we support the Attorney General's Office. We're basically helping them set up an asset forfeiture regime, which is a way of trying to get quick, as a deterrent, but also quick justice in some form for victims of crime that is sort of fraud and corruption. So rather than waiting for the criminal justice system to take a long time to secure convictions, actually we go after the assets of corrupt individuals and try and sort of recycle that money into public services. And it's an approach that has worked in a lot of other countries. There's a lot of money to be retrieved in Malawi. So I don't actually have the numbers at my fingertips, but I can provide some later in terms of how much money we've helped Malawi recover. But we're still in the process of setting up this system. So time will tell. But if you think, for example, the Cashgate scandal, which was 2016, that case is still going on. And so what we're hoping for is something that will operate a bit quicker and that will act as more of a deterrent.
Yeah, any final question? Quick fire questions? Yeah, we'll do both quickly.
Okay, just very quickly from just connected to that question is has FCDO got anything in Malawi on tax justice? Because we talked about people investing and making it easy for them to invest. Now also you need to run the public services, your health, your education.
And Heather, your question.
It's very different. I'd like to come back to partnerships, which is such an overused word, but so important to us. And in the first place, it's lovely that we've got a partnership with you from Scotland itself. But I wonder, what do you see are the benefits of FCDO and DFID partnership, and how can those be best used by us in the Scotland-Malawi partnership to foster relationships with people.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to that one. On tax justice, we don't have, so in other countries we have sort of classic public financial management programming where we might be helping a government implement a tax regime. We don't have that kind of program in Malawi, but we do probably more on an ad hoc basis, and probably more when organizations, individuals, companies would come to us and say, this is happening, can you help? We do sort of lobby and have sort of private influencing conversations with bits of government that decide tax policy, which is the Ministry of Finance, and then implement it, which is various, like the Bureau of Standards, the Revenue Authority. And it's usually to try and uncover what does the law actually say and how is it being employed or deployed in this particular context. I think the tax regime is not easy to understand. I think particularly as a business, I don't know very much about individual tax, but there's it needs to be simplified. And I think one of the things that we're always saying as a sort of top level message is don't just tax too much the private sector, because that will inhibit growth. So it is one of the barriers, like tax that's hard to understand, or tax that, you know, egregious taxes on international businesses, because they seem like an easy way of raising money. It's a short-term strategy, and actually what we want to see is longer-term growth. So yeah, nothing specific, but quite lobbying and influencing. On partnership. So were you meaning specifically the FCDO Scotland-Malawi partnership?
So because FCDO is now a partnership of FCO and DFID, if you consider it a partnership.
I don't,
then,
it's one organization.
Okay. But yes, then how we can interact better through our Scotland-Malawi partnership and FCDO.
Yeah, so actually one of the things that I say a lot in Malawi is people are getting that they don't know what to call us anymore. They don't know whether to call me DFID and are we part of FCDO? And I just say call us the UK. So that's just a much easier way of engaging with us in Malawi. We're the British High Commission, or we're the UK. FCDO is fine, but I think quite a lot of our partners are not quite understanding. Oh, is that now DFID? And it's not. It's the new organisation that is merged, if that makes sense. And I think I said at the start that we can expect to see partnerships featuring strongly in the new international development strategy. And the Foreign Secretary talks a lot about that, and she'll talk about what she calls the network of liberty, which is really about partnerships between like-minded countries. She's thinking about it in the context of Ukraine, and maybe in the context of Afghanistan as well, where it's trying to make the most of our sort of shared values and trying to use that, sort of bring that to bear on sort of complex geopolitical problems, and also being much clearer about you know, drawing the line between a country like Russia, which has invaded its neighbour, and then the rest of us that are trying to prevent it. But partnership in terms of how we operate in Malawi, and with our sort of important strategic partners, whether it's civil society, whether it's other donors, that will continue to be really critical. For really pragmatic reasons, I think if you were to have someone around the table from a sort of traditionally smaller donor country like Ireland or one of the Scandinavian countries, they know very well things that we have been learning over the last couple of years, which is you need to gang together to get something done, because bringing yourself to the table with a much smaller amount of money, it's not, you don't have the resource that you once had. You can't buy results in the same way. So I think there's something that we are learning as this new merged organisation about how to bring together our ODA spend and also our partnerships and influence and expertise that is sort of bigger than the sum of its parts. So personally, I think that these kinds of partnerships will be more and more important. And I'm kind of learning that what I bring to the table is not just money, it's also other stuff. And so I think we've got more time to spend on that. And I think we, you know, looking specifically at the Scotland-Malawi partnership and FCDO, I think getting together like this is really critical. I think how do we work together to become more than the sum of our sort of parts? How do we talk about the strategic issues that are important to all of us, the cross-cutting issues? How do we make sure that the things that we do as a government, which are very different to the things that sort of unimportant umbrella of NGOs can do? How do we make sure that those are complementary? And I think, you know, I can go in and have tough conversations with government in a sort of government to government way. You can do more in terms of, here's what I'm seeing down at grassroots level, and help amplify the voice of poor Malawians who otherwise don't get heard. The more we talk to each other in this kind of format, I think the more we make sure that those are overlapping and complementary. Thank you.
Well, I think we're looking for Jerry Spring's final thought to we all agree on it. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Stolen my thunder as my summarising remarks, but no, just really to echo that, and my apologies that we're slightly behind time. The danger of chairing a meeting like this, where you're against the clock in a room like this, is you've got a very big clock outside that tells you when you're over time. So my apologies for that. But no, in all seriousness, I think you really have hit the nail on the head. The more that we talk to each other, the more that we connect, the more that we can do that at a strategic but inclusive way, the better both of our impacts will be, and the more that we'll be able to support our friends in Malawi as they support us in dignified and equal partnership. And on that basis, I'm keen, in wrapping up, Stella, as a co-hosted meeting, for you to have space for any final remarks from MaSP's side. Stella, if you're there, over to you. I know she had some connection issues there.
Yeah, yes,
yes.
Yeah, thank you, David. It's quite exciting and thrilling to hear from Fiona and the rest of the members who have posed questions. To hear that FCDO is in partnership with the Malawi government in a number of areas like women and girls, humanitarian, climate change and environment, the private sector development, among others. We have learned a lot, and we are looking forward to find a niche somewhere where we can work more closely, or we can get involved. And you heard from some of the members inviting you to visit their projects. So please feel free when you come back to Malawi, we can go around so that you can appreciate some of the work that is being done by members of the Malawi-Scotland Partnership with support from the Scottish Government. And you also heard from some of the members that they are new, they are just joining, meaning that the membership is growing on a daily basis. So if you are looking for civil society members or NGOs to work with, Malawi-Scotland Partnership members are there, they are willing, they have the experience, the expertise to go into partnership or to work along with FCDO so that we can deliver projects that have positive impact in communities. And one important thing that I would like to mention is the partnership, your focus on private sector development. This one is very key for Malawi, because if at the meantime, we cannot proudly say that we have a very vibrant private sector we have, but we need to trade more with Scotland, with Europe and other countries. So I'm happy to hear that FCDO is there to assist Malawi government in developing the private sector. Fiona, I would like to thank you on behalf of the MaSP members for making yourself available to give us an outlook, or maybe I should say a picture of what FCDO is doing here in Malawi. Thank you so much, and over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Stella. Big thumbs up here from Fiona and from me. Thank you. Yeah, just really to say, apologies that we're slightly over time. Thanks so much for making the effort to be here in person. It's really wonderful to see everyone. And I can say a really big thank you to Fiona, who's giving up your holiday to come and be grilled in an intimidating room like this is really all testament to someone's commitment to a partnership, to a relationship with our network. So you started by saying it's your first in-person meeting in Edinburgh. Let's make sure it's not your last. We'll raise a glass to celebrate your 20 years in civil service. I don't know if there's a long service good conduct medal that you get. We'll give you an honour.
How many years you have to do?
But no, really, thanks ever so much. Craig, if you put them on the screen, the poll for our digital participants, if you're happy to answer those 2 questions, that would be wonderful. Helps us with our mail. And just from our perspective, SMP, 3 actions I've taken. We'll have within 6 months a water forum meeting, and a number of messages for that in the chat box. Sports for Change came up a few times actually. So we're going to do something on that. Again, if you're interested in that, contact us. And sharing information about the Clare call for applications. So that's looking at climate justice and resilience work. If you're interested in that, drop me a line. We'll do things in certainly the next week on the Clare call, because I think the deadline for expressions of interest is a month from now. So this is very much the next week is the sort of fertile time for connecting people up. But brilliant, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Fiona. Can we, now that we're in person, can we have a round of applause? Feel free, if you join remotely, to unmute and say goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, Fiona. Enjoy in Scotland.
Bye.
Bye. But don't forget to come back, yeah?
I'm coming back, don't worry.
Bye-bye, and thank you so much.
I shall come back, don't worry.
Bye.